G'day folks, and welcome to this review of Skies Above Britain. This is a 2022 publication designed by Jeremy White and Gina Willis and published by GMT Games. This is, of course, the successor to Skies Above the Reich and Storm Above the Reich. Both of those previous titles focus on the air war over Germany during the Second World War. This title focuses on the air war during the Battle of Britain in principally July, August 1940. You get a lot in this game. It is a deep box game. There are a lot of very well produced components. I have done an unboxing of this, and in that unboxing I go through the components in a little bit more detail, so I won't sort of go through everything. I'll just point out that there is a lot here and there is a great depth of play and replayability in this title. I'll also acknowledge from the start a bit of a bias on my part. I don't typically like narrative-driven games. I'm often concerned with narrative-driven games that there is a lack of meaningful decision-making, and so I'm not typically drawn to those games. For me though, Jeremy White has a history of more engaging narrative-driven game designs. I have enough familiarity with his designs that led me to pre-order this and order this title to check these out. The fact that there's been two previous titles, this is the third one where the system continues to evolve and see innovation. Of course, this is co-design with Gina Willis, but the fact that it's an evolution of that design, the evolution of narrative-driven game designs, and that Jeremy has had previous success in this area kind of led me to try this out. I'm very glad I did. But that's my sort of preface to this review. I don't typically like narrative-driven games. Having said that, I was very pleasantly surprised with this. I felt there was a good blend of narrative immersion with decision making and a sense of control of my actions to satisfy and overcome that barrier that is often presented to me. There is, and I will point out that when you get to actually a dogfight, or when you are resolving damage, you are kind of letting card draws resolve the damage for you. Once you're in a dogfight, you draw a card to resolve that dogfight, to determine whether or not you shoot down the enemy aircraft or whether or not you are shot down. You don't really have much control over those dogfights. This is not a game like Wings of War or even previous Battle of Britain titles where you are dogfighting in the skies, where you have control over where you turn and what happens. Instead, you are either in one of three positions during a dogfight. You are coming head-on with enemy aircraft, you are tailing enemy aircraft, or you're being tailed by enemy aircraft. And in each of those three positions, you draw a card from the relevant deck and resolve the effects. The key here is you make earlier decisions in this process to put yourself in the best position. So ideally, running through the deck of, for example, tailed or tailing cards, you'll find that if you are tailing an enemy aircraft, if you're behind them in a firing position, you have a far better chance of causing a hit and avoiding damage than if you are being tailed, for example. If you're being tailed by an enemy aircraft, you have a greater chance of being hit. Now, knowing that means that you want to be in a best position to be tailing the enemy aircraft, and you can make decisions along the way to give yourself the best chance of being in that position. Much of your decision process revolves around the interception map, and this is kind of the main board that you'll have set up during the campaign. This is where most of the activity takes place. It is where you see the raid coming in across the channel and towards its target. It is where you maneuver your squadrons and your flights around the around the bomber formation. You can cruise around this bomber formation. You take into account the position of the sun. You take into account visibility. You take into account the nature, the weight, the size, and the positioning of enemy escorts to cruise your formations plural, because you can break down your squadron into flights and sections. You can maneuver these components to put yourself in the best position to attempt to intercept the escorts, and B, attempt to intercept the bombers. And I say attempt because, again, this is where your decisions are critical. You make a decision on where you cruise around to, where you are relative to the sun, relative to the bombers, relative to the escorts. And then once you are in position and you're ready to make an interception attempt, you either attempt to intercept the escorts, and all these factors play into the die roll that you make. So yes, you are making a die roll to attempt to intercept, but for example, if you are attempting to intercept an escort and you are high, trailing the escort, and they're in a low position relative to the bomber formation, you only have to roll a 2 or higher to succeed. So you've got a very, very over 90% chance of succeeding in that interception attempt. Conversely, if you are in the high position on the tail, so you're on the tail of these escorts, you're coming in high behind the bomber, and they are in a position ahead of that bomber formation, you both have to spend fuel to catch up to them, and you need a 12 or greater to successfully intercept those escorts. And that's just an example of the two very different ends of the spectrum, where putting yourself in a good position to intercept the escorts based on where they are relative to the bombers gives you very different chances of success or failure. If you succeed, you gain an advantage in that subsequent dogfight. If you fail, the Luftwaffe gain an advantage in that dogfight. What this means is if you have the advantage, you are more likely to be tailing the enemy. You are more likely to be drawing damage cards that help you, that cause hits. If you find yourself at a disadvantage, you are more likely to be tailed. You are more likely to suffer hits as a result. So all these things, you'll often find yourself on the interception map in a random location, but you can cruise around and make these decisions. You are managing things like your fuel. You're managing time. You're managing your altitude. You're managing your position. You are making decisions to respond to each of these factors that shape then what happens during the dogfight. So whilst the dogfight is resolved fairly quickly, the setup for the dogfight is where you're making these really interesting and important decisions. There are a number of factors, as I said, that shape these decisions. The position of the sun. If you're coming out of the sun, you might want to stay right where you are because it's advantageous to attack out of the sun. If the enemy is raiding a target along the coast and they raid early, so the bombers have dropped their bombs and they're returning to home, you might want to intercept early without wasting time cruising around. If you're running low on fuel, for whatever reason, you may want to move quickly. You might want to quickly jump on the bombers' tails and hit them hard and fast, suffer some casualties as a result because they're heading back to Germany. You need to get them quickly. Conversely, if they're raiding deep into England and you've intercepted them early, you can spend some time cruising around. You may choose to cruise around to get into a more advantageous position before you attempt to intercept. This may mean that having spent the time to move towards a position where you're coming out of the sun, your roll to intercept the escorts may be more successful. You're more likely to get an advantage. All these kind of things accumulate and shape the precise nature of that dogfight. When you intercept the bombers, I've mentioned escorts and how they're resolved by these cards. When you intercept the bombers, the position you attack the bombers has different effects as well. If you come in from the tail, as I mentioned, you are more likely to score hits, but you are also equally as likely to be hit yourself. So yes, you'll score more hits coming in from the tail, but you are more likely to be hit yourself. If you come in from the flanks, you are less likely to score hits, but you are also less hits. So you're making decisions about, well, am I prepared to take casualties? Am I prepared to take losses to speed these things along? How heavy and hard do I want to hit the bombers? You're also making decisions about, okay, do I want to disrupt the bomber formations? And these decisions change throughout the course of the campaign. So I've mentioned in some of my videos that early in the full campaign, there are basically 4 chapters in the full campaign, and they take you through the story really of the Battle of Britain. So here's a campaign, 4 chapters, July to the 10th of August 1940, the 11th to the 18th of August 1940, 19th to the 6th of September 1940, and September to October. Each of these chapters changes the setting. It changes the nature of the bombers that are attacking you, the type of bombers, their formations, their density, things like that. The weather conditions change. What else changes over the course of these things? The nature of the raids. Early in the campaign, they are raiding coastal targets. Later in the campaign, they are raiding deeper into England, giving you more time to set up your response. Early in the campaign, you're targeting Stukas. Later in the campaign, there are no Stukas as part of the raid, so you're targeting these heavier bombers. And all these things are shaping your decisions. So, whilst there are some elements of gameplay that flow through without much decision making from your part, you are making critical decisions in setting up for that interception. That's where your agency is key. You're deciding, do I risk the fuel? Do I risk the lives of and health of my aircraft and pilots? Do I risk time? Do I have time to do these things? And yeah, you're making these decisions along the way. I want to talk about the learning process for this game because it really is critical. Of all the many hundreds, thousands of games that I've played, this has the best learning experience that I've ever encountered. Gina and Jerry have designed the rulebook and the situation manual, the scenarios, such that this is probably the best learning experience I've ever had with a game. The rulebook is structured such that you flick through a few pages, you set the game up, and very quickly it tells you, all right, just stop here, stop reading here at around about page, 12-ish, and go do a dogfight. Dogfights are very straightforward. The first scenario, the dogfight scenario, takes about 2 to 3 minutes to play through. So you read a few pages of the rulebook, you go play that first scenario, you're up and running and making decisions, running through the cycle very quickly. You then return to the rulebook, read through the next couple of pages about the bomber cycle, return to the situation manual and play through the bomber scenarios. And again, it's a wonderful experience because it breaks all these components down into bite-sized chunks. 2 to 3 minutes for a dogfight cycle, you know what goes on there. You read the rules about bombers, you go to the bomber cycle. About 5 minutes to run through the bomber cycle, 5 to 10 minutes depending on how lucky you are, and you understand how the bomber cycle works. Then you bring this together, you read a few more pages of the rulebooks, you start working through the intercept scenarios, which is where you may have, you intercept the bomber, so you run through that process. All the while you are gradually accumulating an understanding of the rules, you are gradually piecing together the smaller components, and all the while you're playing the game. All the scenarios are broken down into small bite-sized components, making it a very smooth learning journey, a very smooth ride through what is otherwise a pretty hefty 62, 63 page rulebook. At first glance, this looks very intimidating. Once you actually open the front page and start reading, it is beautifully, heavily illustrated, lots of examples and illustrations throughout to make this all very clear. It's a very, I still have the rulebook with me when I'm playing through the game. You are frequently referencing various things. There's a great index on the back page. It's usually very easy to find things. It is very well structured. There are some wonderful player aid charts as well. The rulebook is so good that I'm often going straight to the rulebook rather than the play aid chart. So a lot of things are summarized in the play aid chart, these sequence of plays, but they're kind of interchangeable. You can have this play aid chart set up next to you, or you can have the rulebook sitting in the same place and just rely on the very well structured, well indexed rulebook for the information. There are charts galore in this game. This is the sort of sequence of play, summary of play. You've got the raid sector, the return to base sequence, the interception sequence. You could follow that along. There's the circle display, which is when BF-110s are in a defensive formation. That's another way to fight sort of a a dogfight. You have another extended sequence of play, which has on the reverse side a summary of some of the main icons you'll encounter during dogfights and the like. There are a few tables on there. You have, and I haven't really engaged in this yet, but there's a whole booklet of optional rules. Things like, well, confirmed kills, weaving, random events, graduated replacements. Look, a lot of depth. And again, this points towards the depth of replayability in this game. I mentioned in my unboxing too that there are options in here to link this game with John Butterfield's RAF, published with Decision Games. I own that, I love that. That's on the cards for some time in the future. RAF tie-in guide, so that you can sort of plan your strategy, plan your squadron dispositions, and then fight the battles, fight the interceptions using skies above Britain. You will track your progress on a pilot roster and a squadron log. Here is where you detail your individual pilots, and this is where you form that attachment to these pilots. And it's quite remarkable how connected you become to these pilots. You can use either the historical squadron log, the historical 303 squadron or 54 squadron, using those pilots that were part of those squadrons in 1940, or you can give your pilots names from A to W, and you track their participation in patrols. You track their kills. You track additional experiences, whether they were shot down, survived, became prisoners of war, killed, bailed out over the channel, all these kind of things. Yes, so charts galore, components galore as well. You have nice sturdy blocks to track your aircraft. You have dozens of counters to track other elements of gameplay throughout the game. They all fit nicely inside a single GMT counter tray. There is, once you have everything set up, it is a big footprint game. I mean, I found myself sprawling across my table. I had charts all around me. It is usually easier to find things. Everything has its place. You know where things go. Again, working your way through the scenarios, everything kind of flows and makes sense. It is just, there's a lot of it going on. A lot of these charts to consult. As I said, often referring back to the rulebook to clarify things here and there. The experience is, as a narrative-driven game, as I said, I had concerns about, well, I don't usually like these type of games, but very quickly was very impressed. I mean, I was really taken in by that learning experience and the intelligent design of this system, where it eases you in gradually step by step, and before you know it, you're running with a campaign and you've got your pilots and you're thinking about long-term strategy and pilot fatigue and getting your veteran pilots to guide the green pilots into battle and things like this. Yeah, as I said before, you are making most of the important decisions you make are in the setting up of your interception. You're making decisions about what pilots to bring along. You're making decisions about, well, do I bring a fatigued pilot or do I arrest them and bring a green pilot along instead? So you're making decisions about your pilot roster. You're making decisions about what sections to move where, what orders to issue to each section. Do you send your experienced pilot to intercept the escorts, or do you keep them to attack the bombers? These are decisions that you're making. Do you throw everything at the bombers, or do you split your squadron up into two flights so that there's even disposition? Do you throw all your eggs in one basket and have a flight intercept the escorts? I could go on about some of these important decisions you're making, but my point, and I'm really emphasizing this point, is that you are making these decisions pre-interception, in the lead up to interception. Once you've made your decisions and you've kind of got the setup, combat itself tends to just flow without much control or agency from you. During a dogfight, you'll often make decisions about sort of what tactics, what maneuvers to perform, whether you want to try to evade, slip, or turn. it's a bit then a case of rock, paper, scissors. You perform a slip maneuver. You hope to match that with the card you've drawn. If you do, you've made a good decision. If not, you suffer the consequences, which is maybe a hit or things like that. But by that stage, you've kind of got the whole setup for the battle, for the dogfight, and there's not much more you can do beyond making those decisions about maneuvers. You're making some different decisions when you attack the bombers. When you attack the bombers, as I mentioned, you attack from a certain angle, and you can change your approach. So if you attack from the flank, you attack the bombers and you fly by, you can circle around and attack on the flank again, or you can try to come behind the tail of the bombers following a delay. So you can change your kind of tactics mid-battle when you're engaged with those bombers. And as I mentioned earlier, you're making kind of more, I guess, operational decisions regarding what you're trying to do to these bombers, whether you're trying to disrupt their raid to make their raid less effective on the target because the formations have been broken up, they don't raid as effectively, or perhaps they've already raided, so you're making the decision to shoot down as many bombers as possible. Or perhaps you're worried about your pilots, you've suffered some attrition, some recent losses of your pilots, and so you're making a more careful decision to preserve your fighters. So you're adopting a more cautious approach. You'll try to shoot down some bombers, but really preservation of your squadrons becomes a new priority for you. The fascinating thing is these decisions change over the course of a campaign. Early in the campaign, you've got a full roster, healthy pilots, a couple of veterans. You can throw caution to the wind and see what happens. By the hardest days, you may find yourself really struggling with losses and needing to play a bit safer. So you're avoiding that tail position. You're attacking from the flanks instead, and maybe you're returning to base a little earlier than you were early in the campaign, just to ensure that your pilots aren't running low on fuel, to avoid possible bailouts over the channel and the like. So yeah, there is, for those of you, and this is always my concern with narrative-driven games, am I actually involved in these decision-making processes? Do my decisions make a difference? I can say yes, categorically yes, absolutely yes, but it's not in the dogfighting itself. Okay, so you're making all these decisions leading up to the dogfight. That is when your input is of most critical importance. And there's a lot of different decisions you make there. Once you actually get to the dogfight, this is not a game where you are really controlling your aircraft in dogfight. Once you get to the dogfight point, whether you have advantage or disadvantage, you're then kind of locked into the cards of fate in a sense, and you're drawing cards hoping for the best. It's a very quick process to resolve. And once you get the hang of it, you're drawing these cards quite quickly. That's a miss, that's a miss, that's a hit. I shoot down the enemy, we're done with dogfighting. That's as quick as it can be resolved. And then once a dogfight is resolved, so it's almost, a dogfight is almost like how can I put this? It's not quite a distraction, but a side note to the broader activity going on. You are trying to intercept the bombers, you're trying to shoot down bombers, disrupt their raid. A dogfight happens, you quickly do a little sidebar where you're running through a dogfight, it's resolved, maybe you lost a fighter, the rest of the section tries to chase and catch up to the bombers to focus on what you're really trying to do and achieve here. Yeah, and then at the end of a patrol, you check for your pilots, you check those that suffered a hit, perhaps the pilot had some wing damage and fell out of formation. You roll a dice to see what happens to them. Perhaps they caught fire, but they bailed out and they ended up in hospital, and you manage the welfare of your pilots. Throughout the course of this campaign, you are really striving for victory points, but you're doing that, you're deriving victory points from different sources. So I mentioned again in some of my videos how early in the campaign, you've got these very vulnerable Stukas, and you will get, chapter 1 in particular, you'll get most of your victory points by shooting down Stukas. Because early in the campaign, the Germans are raiding targets along the coast, they are raiding early, and most of the time you're not getting there, you're not intercepting in time before they drop their bombs. So you're often trying to catch them as they're turning and returning to Germany. It's too late to disrupt their formation, so now you're just trying to shoot down as many as possible, as quickly as possible, before they get back over the French, Dutch, Belgian coast. Later in the campaign, they're raiding deeper targets, and this is where you get victory points for disrupting those formations. How do you disrupt formations? Again, luck of the draw. You attack bombers, you try to get a disruption result, which causes these formations, causes kete, individual bomber sort of sections, to fall out of formation. That disrupts their bombing plans and gives you victory points. Look, bringing this all together, there's so much in this game. Dogfights, attacks on bombers, pilot roster management, your attachment to particular pilots, the whole interception board and what is going on. You've also got the section display where you are managing. This is the board where you manage your sections, you place your aircraft on here. You're managing the formations of your sections, flights and squadrons and the pilots attached to them. You can get veteran pilots with special abilities. They can ignore damage results or ignore low ammo results and things like this. You can get ace pilots, lots of little thematic flavor to this, all of which enhances your immersion in this title. Look, if you were like me and you're concerned about narrative-driven games, I've got to say, Skies Above Britain is and I haven't tried many, I will say, but this is certainly close to, if not at the top of my list of narrative-driven games. I am trying to rack my mind, and I can't think of a narrative-driven game that I've been so immersed in as Skies Above Britain. Narrative-driven game that has enabled me to make critical decisions that critically, actively shape the story that's developing. That where I feel that at the end of a patrol or at the end of a campaign that my result is kind of aligned with the decisions I make. I decided to make risky decisions, I had risky outcomes. I decided to make safe decisions, I had safe outcomes. Success or failure comes down to, really, did I make the right decisions at the right time? Did I decide to burn through that fuel, to quickly rush to intercept that bomber formation so I could score victory points before they returned to Germany? Things like that. You know at the end of a campaign whether or not you have made the right decisions. It's not a case of, well, I got unlucky here. It's a case of, I made the right decision for that circumstance. As a result then, there's a learning journey. Once you go through the scenarios and you're up to the campaign, you learn how the campaigns work. You learn about what the Germans are doing, and you learn how to respond to them in the right way, in the right circumstances. You begin to understand when you are pressed for time, when you need to burn for fuel, when you need to really intercept those escorts, or when you need to just dive straight at the bombers. You kind of begin to discern those things. And to me, that process of learning means, the depth of play here means that it really does take this game away from just luck-driven narrative to me making important, meaningful decisions that shapes the outcome of events. I highly recommend Skies Above Britain for those of you. Look, if you're interested in the Battle of Britain, it's a must-have. It really captures the feel. I can't comment on how it differs to other titles. I've heard bits and pieces that they've tweaked the rules to really reflect the nature of combat over Britain, the raiding, the inbound vector charts, all those kind of things. But I can't comment in detail because I haven't played those previous titles. What else can I say about this? Very easy to learn, wonderful learning experience, very satisfying, very immersive, very deep and replayable. There is a sense here that, as I said, with all these optional rules, you could just keep playing and playing. I found it very easy to leave setup and walk away. I'd run through a sequence of play at the end of a turn, even sometimes partway through a turn, put a little marker on where you are, walk away, return to it, have everything set up. You've got your roster, your pilot sheets, so you can easily leave it for weeks at a time at the end of a patrol. And of course, fantastic GMT production quality. Folks, I hope that has been of interest. I hope I've really addressed what were initially my concerns about playing a narrative-driven game. And yeah, as I said, it's wildly surpassed my my expectations, folks. That is Jerry White and Gina Willis's Skies Above Britain. Thank you for watching and take care.